The desert wind cut across the sand like a whip, tugging at Lila's shawl and tossing her dark hair into her face. She squinted against the rising sun, each grain of sand stinging her cheeks like tiny embers. For days she had walked alone, the vast expanse of the Mojave stretching endlessly in every direction, dry, harsh, and unforgiving. Her boots sank into the powdery ground with every step, leaving a trail that seemed hopelessly insignificant in the vastness of the desert. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, thirst parched her throat, and yet a stubborn defiance kept her moving. Her mind flashed back to the letter she had found pinned to the door of the old homestead. Go. Trust no one. Save yourself. No explanation. No signature, just words that had set her journey in motion. And now the wind carried whispers of something else, movement. She froze, the coarse sand shifting beneath her feet, heart hammering in her chest. From the distant horizon, a figure emerged, silhouetted against the blinding glare of the morning sun. At first, she thought it might be another traveler or a mirage, but as it drew closer, her pulse quickened. The figure was impossibly tall and straight, moving with a grace that seemed almost unnatural in the rough terrain. Long black hair streamed behind him, catching the sunlight like threads of night. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the desert with the patience of a predator. And then, unexpectedly, they locked onto hers. I'd give 6 of my horses just to hold you for one night, he murmured, his voice low, resonant, carrying a strange intimacy that made Lila shiver. The words made no sense, and yet they landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. Who was this man, and why did he speak as though they shared some secret history? She tightened her shawl around her shoulders, unsure if she should run or stand her ground. His presence was magnetic and unnerving, and the desert around them seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them against the stark horizon. You? Who are you? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but it came out rough, raw with exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, letting the wind carry his long coat and the scent of sage and leather to her. Kiyan, he said simply. His eyes softened just slightly, though a shadow of wariness remained. I've watched these sands for years. You shouldn't be here alone. She swallowed, her throat dry. I have no choice. I'm trying to survive. His gaze flickered over her face, taking in the dirt streaked on her cheeks, the trembling of her hands, and the way the morning light caught in her brown hair. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a careful, calculated concern that made her stomach tighten. Then you'll need my help. Follow me, and I'll make sure you live through the sun and sand. Something deep inside her hesitated. Trust did not come easily, not in a world where men's words were often sharper than knives. But the intensity in his gaze, the strength in his stride, spoke of someone who had survived deserts, battles, and betrayals that she couldn't even imagine. Against her better judgment, curiosity, and perhaps something else entirely, compelled her to follow. He led her along a narrow canyon path, the sun climbing higher and burning the air like molten iron. The ground was littered with jagged rocks, and the wind carried the faint scent of distant sagebrush and the promise of water. As they walked, he occasionally glanced back at her, checking that she could keep pace. His presence was overwhelming, not just in stature, but in the silent authority he carried, the kind that demanded both fear and fascination. Hours passed, the sun's glare relentless. Yet for the first time in days, Lila felt a strange flicker of hope. Somehow, against the desert's cruelty, she had stumbled into something dangerous and yet necessary, a protector, a guide, perhaps even something more she dared not name. Her muscles ached, her throat burned, but her resolve hardened. She would survive this desert. She would learn from this mysterious man, Kiyan, and maybe, just maybe, she would uncover the reason she had been sent here, into the heart of the unforgiving Mojave, to meet him. When they finally stopped at the base of a jagged rock overhang, he turned to her and nodded. "Rest here. There is water nearby. You'll need your strength for what comes next." As she sank to the dusty ground, the wind brushing her face, she realized her life had irrevocably changed. She didn't know this man, didn't understand the depths of the danger or desire that seemed to hang around him, but she could feel it a force as unyielding as the desert itself. And deep inside, she wondered if she could ever go back to the world she had known before this moment. The canyon narrowed as Kiyan led Lila over uneven rocks and through shadowed crevices, his bare feet striking the stone with a rhythm that somehow made her own clumsy steps feel coordinated. The wind had died down, leaving only the faint hiss of sand shifting in the distance. She noticed the way he moved, each motion precise, controlled, and deliberate. There was no haste in him, yet every step felt purposeful, as if the desert itself obeyed his command. At last, they reached a secluded overhang that jutted out like a natural fortress. Beneath it, a small camp had been carved from necessity. Piles of dried herbs hung from wooden beams. A simple stone fire pit smoked softly, and leather blankets were draped over flat rocks to serve as makeshift beds. The scent of cedar and sage filled the air, mingling with the faint earthy aroma of dust and sun-baked stone. Lila blinked in wonder, realizing this was more than a mere shelter. It was a hidden sanctuary carved into the unforgiving wilderness. Kiyan gestured for her to sit on one of the blankets. "Drink," he said, handing her a small clay cup of water. The liquid was cool and clean, a shock to her parched throat. She drank greedily, savoring every drop, and felt the first real relief in days. "You move as though you've survived." "More than the desert itself," Kiyan said, settling onto a nearby rock. The early sun glinted across the muscles of his chest and arms, bare and bronzed, revealing scars that told stories no words could. Each mark seemed etched by battles and betrayals, a map of a life lived on the edge. "I've learned to survive," Lila admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "Sometimes it feels like the world wants to crush you, but you keep walking anyway." He nodded slowly, eyes dark and unreadable. "The desert teaches truth. There is no place for lies here." His gaze softened as he looked at her, not with pity, but recognition, as if he saw the fire in her heart mirrored in his own. For a long moment, they simply watched the canyon walls, the sunlight spilling over the rock face in warm streaks of gold and amber. Kiyan rose and moved to the fire pit, crouching to add small twigs and dry leaves. Sparks danced in the air as flames licked the cold morning air. Lila shivered, both from the lingering chill and from the intensity of the man before her. He was a presence she couldn't ignore, a mixture of danger and safety, strength and silence. "Understanding. Eat," he said, offering her a piece of dried meat and a few roasted roots. Hunger gnawed at her again, and she accepted, biting into the food with both relief and caution. Every taste was earthy and raw, yet somehow nourishing, grounding her in the reality of survival. As she ate, she studied him. Kiyan's eyes never left her, but not with intrusion. There was a protective quality, an unspoken promise. "Follow my lead, and you may survive." The way he moved, the way he spoke, the silent gravity in his posture, everything suggested he had survived far worse than she could imagine. And yet, there was a vulnerability hidden beneath the layers of strength, a hint of loneliness that made her stomach tighten in sympathy. After a moment, he pulled out a small bundle of herbs and began sorting them carefully. "These are for pain, these for fever, these for sleep," he said quietly. Each movement was meticulous, almost reverent. Even the strongest body can fail without respect for it. He glanced at her with a faint smile, showing a rare softness. "Tomorrow you will need your strength. Why are you helping me?" she asked, curiosity edging her exhaustion. You don't even know me." Kiyan's eyes darkened, and for a heartbeat, he seemed to disappear into the shadows of the canyon. "I know more than you think. The desert brings strangers together for reasons that are not always clear at first. But once you are here, you are under my watch. You will not walk alone." Lila's heart thumped loudly. She had survived long enough to know the world was cruel, yet here stranded in a canyon, under the care of a mysterious warrior, she felt something unfamiliar, trust, fragile but undeniable, beginning to take root. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether danger or salvation, but for the first time in days she allowed herself to breathe. The sun climbed higher, casting golden beams across the rocky walls, illuminating the camp in warmth and promise. Lila felt the first hint of hope in weeks. The desert was vast, harsh, and merciless, but here, in the shadow of the canyon and under the watchful eyes of Kiyan, she might finally find the strength to face it. And somehow, she sensed that the story of her survival was only beginning. The morning calm shattered as the sky darkened in minutes, clouds rolling in like an angry tide over the desert horizon. Lila's heart skipped a beat, and she grabbed at Kiyan's arm. "A storm coming!" she shouted, her voice nearly lost. In the sudden rush of wind, Kiyan's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon with the intensity of a hunter. "Stay close." "We move fast," he commanded, his voice low and steady. His bare chest glistened with sweat as he adjusted the firewood to shield it from the first gusts. Even in this sudden chaos, he moved with precision, his muscles coiling and releasing like a predator ready to strike. The wind tore through the canyon with the force of a charging stallion, whipping sand into Lila's face and blinding her. She stumbled over jagged rocks, coughing, squinting, her shawl flapping like a flag in the storm. Kiyan caught her elbow with a firm grip, his hand warm and grounding against the freezing chaos. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar. "We'll reach the overhang. It's our only shelter." Lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. Lila's stomach dropped with every flash, and fear clenched her chest. But in the midst of panic, Kiyan's presence was a tether. He moved effortlessly over rocks and sand, pulling her along. His long black hair plastered to his shoulders and face, the tribal beads around his neck rattling with every step. She noticed the scars along his arms and chest glinting in the flashes of lightning, a reminder of battles survived, pain endured, and strength unbroken. Finally, they dove under the rocky overhang. Lila collapsed onto a flat stone, gasping, as Kiyan crouched beside her, adjusting blankets and securing a crude lean-to of cloth and wood to block the driving sand. The storm pounded around them, but inside this small shelter, the world narrowed to the two of them, the smell of wet stone, dust, and fire mingling in the air, and the soft thrum of adrenaline in their veins. "You're safe here," Kiyan said, his voice calmer now, though the storm outside still roared. "Breathe." Lila tried, inhaling the sharp, dust-laden air, her body trembling. She felt the warmth of his bare arm brushing hers as he worked, a stark contrast to the cold fury of the desert outside. His presence was overwhelming, magnetic, and yet steadying. She had never felt such a strange mixture of fear and trust. Fire sputtered as Kiyan added more kindling, sparks scattering into the dark corners of the overhang. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes," he said, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "Even one step off the path can cost you everything." He glanced at Lila, the intensity in his gaze softened by concern. "You made it this far, though. That means you can survive." "Thanks to you," Lila admitted, her voice small. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the layers beneath the strength, the quiet isolation, the scars, and the raw, unspoken pain. She realized he had lived a life of constant vigilance, carrying burdens she couldn't imagine. Yet here he was, offering her shelter, safety, and a quiet patience she hadn't known she needed. Lightning illuminated the canyon again, and for a fleeting moment, Lila saw the wind whip across Kiyan's sculpted torso, his tribal jewelry glinting, beads clinking softly. Her stomach tightened, not with fear, but with a pulse of something new, raw, and unacknowledged. Desire, danger, and trust intertwined in a single, electrifying thread between them. Hours passed in the storm's fury, but the overhang held. Rain and sand battered the rocky walls. The wind howled like a living thing, and yet inside, they were. Alive, awake, and tethered together by circumstance and an unspoken bond. Lila dared to inch closer to him, seeking warmth, safety, and perhaps the first taste of something she had long denied herself, hope. When the storm finally began to fade, leaving the canyon shimmering with dust and sunlight breaking through clouds, Lila's clothes were damp and hair plastered to her cheeks. Yet she felt strangely alive. She looked at Kiyan, the man who had pulled her from fear and into trust, and for the first time she imagined a future where the desert didn't have to be a place of isolation and death, but a crucible where bonds were forged, and survival meant more than merely enduring. And in that quiet, storm-swept canyon, she knew one thing with certainty. She would follow him through every desert, every danger, because somehow Kiyan had become her anchor in the wild, untamed West. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed in an eerie calm. Lila stepped carefully over wet sand and glistening rocks, her boots slipping slightly on the slick surfaces. Kiyan led the way, bare-chested, the beads and leather of his tribal, jewelry catching the weak sunlight as he moved with effortless grace. Each step was measured, every motion precise, a predator in the quiet aftermath of chaos. Lila followed closely, heart pounding from both exertion and the lingering thrill of surviving the storm. "You need to stay close," Kiyan said without turning. His voice was low, carrying authority but not anger. "There are men ahead, bounty hunters. They've been spotted near an abandoned town, old, forgotten, but dangerous. We must be careful." Lila swallowed hard, trying to match his pace. Her chest burned from the climb over rocks and the strain of navigating the desert terrain, but the fear in her gut kept her alert. "Why would they be here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "They search for what isn't theirs." Kiyan replied grimly, "Gold goods, revenge? They leave nothing but death in their wake." His gaze flicked toward the horizon, dark eyes scanning the distant ridges as if the wind itself whispered secrets to him. Lila shivered, feeling both the chill of morning air and the heat of anticipation in her stomach. The journey was silent for a while, broken only by the crunch of sand underfoot and the occasional call of a distant bird. Kiyan's presence was a constant, grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. His bare chest gleamed with sweat, muscles taut and rippling, and the scars on his arms hinted at battles survived, pain endured, and strength unbroken. Lila felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. She had no words for it, only a pulse of something she couldn't yet name out as the sun climbed higher. The abandoned town came into view, a cluster of crumbling wooden buildings, their paint faded to gray, windows shattered, and doors hanging loosely on broken hinges. The streets were littered with sand and debris, wind howling through empty alleys. Lila's stomach clenched. The place seemed lifeless, yet alive with the whisper of danger. Kiyan crouched behind a toppled wagon, signaling for her to stay low. "They'll see us first if we walk in openly," he muttered. His fingers brushed against hers briefly, guiding her down behind cover. Lila felt her pulse quicken, not just from fear, but from the closeness of him, the strength in his hand, the warmth that contrasted the chill in the air. They moved like shadows, creeping from ruin to ruin, every step calculated. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and rusted metal, and Lila caught glimpses of footprints in the sand, too large, too heavy to be hers, yet recent. Her chest tightened. "Kiyan." "They're here," she whispered, voice trembling. He nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "Stay calm. Trust me." With that, he stepped out, bare feet silent against the sand, long black hair whipping around his bronzed shoulders. A glint of sunlight caught the beads around his neck as he raised a hand, signaling Lila forward. She obeyed instinctively, heart racing with each careful step. The streets of the ghost town were eerily quiet. Broken signs swung in the breeze, their wood groaning like the town itself was whispering warnings. A tumbleweed skittered across the road, carrying with it the sound of dry leaves crunching. Lila shivered, glancing at Kiyan. He moved like a shadow, eyes alert, every muscle coiled. And ready. She had never felt more alive and more aware of her vulnerability than in this moment. As they reached the edge of the town, Kiyan crouched low behind the remnants of a boarded-up saloon. "We rest here," he said. His dark eyes met hers. For a long second, unspoken words passing between them. Danger, survival, and something deeper, an intimacy born of shared risk. Lila exhaled, the tension in her muscles easing slightly, though she knew the threat was far from over. She looked at him, truly looked, and felt a mixture of awe and something more, an unspoken bond forming in the silence of this abandoned place. The desert had thrown storms, fear, and menacing strangers at them, yet somehow, in the shadow of ruin and under Kiyan's watchful gaze, she felt a spark of hope. Survival was not enough anymore. She wanted more. She wanted to follow him through the dangers ahead, to trust the man who had already saved her life twice, and to see what lay beyond the desolate streets of this ghost town. And for the first time, Lila realized that the journey through the harsh, unforgiving West might not just be about survival. It might also be about finding connection, courage, and a man who, against every odds, had become her guide, protector, and perhaps something more. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the ghost town, but its light did little to soften the shadows that stretched across the cracked wooden streets. Lila's heart pounded like a drum in her chest, each beat echoing the fear that had taken root ever since Kiyan had whispered of the bounty hunters nearby. She clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, eyes wide, as they moved silently from building to building, the sound of distant wind masking their footsteps. "Stay close," Kiyan murmured, his voice barely audible over the rustle of broken shutters and shifting sand. His bare chest gleamed in the moonlight, muscles tense, and the beads of his tribal jewelry clinked softly as he moved. His dark eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, calculating and alert. Lila felt the magnetic pull of his presence, part fear, part fascination as she followed his lead. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the fragile stillness, the sound snapping like a whip across the empty streets. Lila froze, her breath catching in her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, gun raised, eyes glinting with menace. Kiyan reacted instantly, his body a fluid motion of strength and precision. He pushed Lila behind an overturned barrel, his arm brushing hers, warm and grounding, even in the chaos. "They're after us," she whispered, panic threading her words. "I know," Kiyan replied, voice steady. "Move with me. Trust me." He vaulted over debris, landing silently on the other side of the street, pulling an arrow from his quiver with practiced speed. The first attacker fired again, bullets chipping wood and kicking up dust at Kiyan's feet. In a blur of motion, he loosed the arrow. It flew true, striking the assailant in the shoulder, and the man collapsed with a grunt. Lila gasped, heart hammering. She had never seen someone move like this, fast, precise, deadly, and yet somehow controlled, almost effortless in his lethal grace. "Keep low," Kiyan shouted, already moving toward the next shadow. Lila ducked, stumbling over rubble, adrenaline making her limbs feel lighter and heavier all at once. The wind carried the sharp tang of gunpowder and the faint metallic scent of blood. She realized with a shock that she wasn't terrified of Kiyan. She was terrified of losing him, of the thought of navigating this chaos without his guiding presence. The attackers were fast, but Kiyan was faster. He weaved through the town like a shadow, each arrow and dodge precise, his muscles rippling under moonlight, every scar on his chest and arms telling a story of survival. Lila followed as best she could, her breathing ragged, heart slamming in her chest, each step forcing her closer to him, closer to a trust she had never known she could feel. At one point, a figure lunged from the shadows toward Lila, but Kiyan reacted instantly, shoving her behind a toppled cart and confronting the man with a snarl. The moonlight caught his face, fierce and protective, and for a moment, Lila was struck by the intensity of his presence, the raw power, the danger, and the care all entwined in a single, undeniable force. Finally, after what felt like endless moments, the last shadow fell back into the darkness, retreating into the night. Lila sank to the ground, trembling, and Kiyan crouched beside her, steadying her with strong, calloused hands. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the beating of his heart under bronzed muscle, and the faint clink of tribal beads against his chest. "You're safe for now," he said quietly, eyes scanning the deserted streets one last time. Then, softer, he added, "You made it. You're alive." Lila exhaled shakily, relief mingling with exhilaration. She looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw not just a warrior, but someone who had saved her life with no hesitation, whose strength had become her anchor in a world that had seemed cruel and unyielding. Her chest swelled with gratitude and something more, a flicker of something forbidden and thrilling, born from fear, trust, and proximity. Kiyan extended a hand to help her to her feet, his gaze lingering on hers in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. The moonlight danced over his muscles, the leather and beads of his tribal jewelry catching the glow. Lila accepted his hand, and for a heartbeat, they stood in silence, two souls tethered by survival, danger, and an unspoken electric connection. As they disappeared into the shadows of the town, Lila realized that the desert had tested her, pushed her to the edge of fear and endurance, but in Kiyan's presence, she had discovered a new strength. The chase was over, but the journey was far from finished and deep inside. She knew their bond would only grow stronger with every peril the unforgiving West hurled their way. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the sun dipping low on the horizon and painting the sand in shades of amber and crimson. Lila squinted, shielding her eyes, as Kiyan led the way along a narrow canyon pass. His bare chest gleamed with sweat, muscles taut, and the tribal beads and leather straps around his neck clinked softly with each step. The air was thick with heat, dust, and the faint scent of sage, and every rock and dune seemed alive with danger. "Almost there," Kiyan sighed, his deep voice carrying a rare softness. "This pass will take us around the hunter's trail. Stay close and don't make a sound." Lila nodded, heart hammering. Her arms ached from the climb over jagged rocks, and her throat burned from the desert heat, but she forced herself to keep pace. Each step beside Kiyan was a mixture of fear and trust. She had followed him through storms, through gunfire, through shadows that could have swallowed her whole, and somehow his presence made the impossible seem possible. The canyon. Walls rose high, jagged and imposing, casting long, shifting shadows that moved like living creatures in the dying light. Kiyan moved silently, a predator attuned to every whisper of wind and shift of sand. His dark eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert to the faintest movement. Lila noticed the scars along his chest and arms, each one a silent testament to battles fought and survived, a map of pain and endurance that made her chest tighten. Suddenly, a rattling sound echoed off the canyon walls, a loose rock tumbling down from above. Lila froze, heart leaping into her throat. Kiyan's hand shot out, gripping her elbow and pulling her behind a large boulder. His body pressed against hers, and for a moment, she felt the heat radiating from his skin, the steady strength in his arms, and the rhythm of his heartbeat. Her pulse raced, not from fear alone, but from the closeness, the intensity of the moment. There. Close, Kiyan muttered, eyes dark and sharp. We must move now. He led her along a narrow ledge, each step careful and deliberate. Lila followed, trusting his guidance, even when the path seemed impossible. Below them, the canyon dropped steeply, the rocks jagged and unforgiving. One misstep could mean death. Yet Kiyan moved with such confidence and precision that she felt, for the first time, a strange sense of security in the midst of peril. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks, they reached a small alcove tucked into the canyon wall. Kiyan motioned for Lila to rest. We'll camp here for the night, he said softly, breaking his usual stoic demeanor. The hunters won't follow us this far. She sank to the dusty ground, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Kiyan knelt beside her, gathering small twigs and lighting a fire with remarkable speed. Sparks danced into the cooling air, illuminating his bronzed, scarred torso and the glint of his tribal jewelry. Lila watched him, awe mingled with a stirring she didn't fully understand. He was strength and danger and protection all at once, and she felt a pull toward him that frightened and thrilled her. You've endured much, Kiyan said quietly, his voice carrying a rare warmth. The desert tests those who enter it, but it also rewards those who survive. He glanced at her, eyes softening just enough to reveal the humanity beneath his warrior exterior. You're strong, Lila, stronger than you realize. She looked at him, breath-catching, and realized she had never felt truly seen before. Not by anyone, not like this. His gaze wasn't just assessing or wary, it was recognizing her strength, her endurance, and perhaps something deeper, something unspoken. Night fell fully, and the fire crackled between them. Lila's head ached, her body ached, yet a strange calm settled over her. She was alive. She had survived storms, gunfire, and the desert itself. And she had done so with Kiyan at her side, a man whose presence had become her anchor in a world that had often seemed merciless and cruel. As she curled beneath a blanket, the desert stars gleaming above, Lila realized the truth. This journey was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, about connection, and about discovering the strength she had always carried, waiting for someone like Kiyan to help her find it. And in the quiet of the desert night, with the fire flickering and shadows dancing along the canyon walls, she allowed herself to hope for safety, for survival, and perhaps for something even more profound, a bond that might withstand anything the unforgiving West could throw at them. The first rays of dawn cut across the desert horizon, spilling golden light over jagged rocks and wind-swept sand. Lila blinked against the brightness, the cool morning air carrying the faint scent of sage and smoke from last night's fire. She sat beside Kiyan in the small alcove, still wrapped in her shawl, watching as he tended the smoldering embers. His bare chest glistened with dew from the night, muscles flexing as he moved, and the beads of his tribal jewelry caught the early light, casting tiny sparks around him. You slept well? Kiyan asked quietly, his voice low and steady, though the corner of his mouth hinted at a smile. Lila nodded, brushing sand from her hair. Better than I have in days, she admitted. Her gaze lingered on him. After everything, the storm, the hunters, the desert's relentless tests, she realized that he had been her anchor through it all. She had followed him blindly, trusted him completely, and now, in the calm of morning, that trust felt unshakable. Kiyan's eyes, dark and intense, met hers. "You've endured much, Lila. The desert tested you, and you survived." "That is why?" He trailed off, searching for words, as if the desert itself had taught him silence. Then he continued firmer. "I'd give 6 of my horses just to hold you for one night. To know you're safe, to keep you near me." Lila's breath caught. The words, raw and unpolished, carried the weight of sincerity, danger, and desire. Her heart thumped in response, not fear this time, but something far more complicated. Hope, longing, and a strange exhilaration that made the desert feel both vast and intimate at once. She began, her voice trembling, unsure of what. To say the desert had been cruel, but Kiyan's presence had made it bearable, even beautiful in unexpected ways. She wanted to tell him, to confess the relief and gratitude, the stirrings of something more profound, but words faltered. She simply nodded, letting the warmth of his gaze speak for them both. The canyon walls glowed gold as the sun rose higher, and Kiyan extended his hand to her. "We move now," he said, but there was no urgency in his tone. It was a promise, a bond forged through storms, gunfire, and the harsh desert night. Lila took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the steady heartbeat beneath his bronzed skin. They began walking through the canyon pass together, side by side. The desert, once a place of fear and isolation, now felt alive with possibility. Kiyan led her carefully, eyes scanning for danger, muscles coiled and ready to protect her at a moment's notice. Yet his presence was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, shared experience, and trust that had been hard-earned. Under impossible circumstances as they crested a ridge, the vast desert stretched before them, endless and unforgiving. But Lila felt no fear. She had faced storms, bounty hunters, and the raw fury of the desert, and she had endured, not alone, but with Kiyan beside her. The realization was empowering, and her chest swelled with newfound courage. They paused to rest, the wind tousling their hair, carrying with it the scent of sage and sun-baked stone. Kiyan's hand brushed hers briefly, a subtle gesture, yet it sent a spark through her that she could not deny. Words were unnecessary. They had shared danger, protection, and survival, and now, a quiet understanding passed between them. Whatever the desert threw at them next, they would face it together. "Thank you," Lila whispered finally, her voice steady, eyes meeting his, "for everything, for being here." Kiyan's dark eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through the stoic exterior. "You're stronger than most men I've known," he said quietly. "And braver. I've seen the fire in you, Lila. Never forget it." The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows and golden light across the canyon. Together they stepped forward, into the vast expanse of the desert. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Lila felt hope. And with Kiyan at her side, the impossible seemed possible. The desert could be harsh and merciless, but it had also given them something extraordinary: survival, trust, and the promise of a bond that no storm, hunter, or canyon could sever. And as they moved forward, side by side, Lila realized that the greatest journey was not just through the desert, it was toward each other.